I was at a quiet ENEOS station in Shinjuku, right as the clock struck midnight on New Year's Eve.
Okay.
And there was this elderly taxi driver there, Tanaka-san, and he was just practically beaming as he watched the digital display on the pump.
Right, because that was the moment it happened.
Exactly. For the first time in 51 years, the temporary gasoline tax had vanished. He looked at me with this genuine, just weary relief and said, finally, someone in the Nagatacho offices actually understands what it's like to live in the real world.
To him, that was a direct signal.
It was everything. Those few yen per liter, they were a sign that the state was finally prioritizing, the survival of its people over its own bottomless hunger for revenue.
But that's only half the story, isn't it?
Not even. Because as he drove off into the night, all satisfied with his small victory, something far, far colder was happening just a few blocks away, deep in the government's inner sanctum.
Right, at the exact same moment.
At that exact moment, the cabinet was finalizing a draft that effectively tore up decades of pacifist tradition. The authorization of counter-strike capabilities. We're talking missiles designed to reach deep into foreign territory.
It just feels like a total paradox.
It does. I mean, how does a nation drowning in debt, struggling with a shrinking population, suddenly decide to give up 1.5 trillion yen in tax revenue, while simultaneously greenlighting its most expensive military expansion since the 1940s?
On the surface, it looks like a contradiction. It looks like they're trying to buy domestic silence with cheap fuel so they can play these high-stakes war games in private.
But that's not what's happening. If you look at the logic of what we're calling the Takai era, it isn't a contradiction at all. It is a chillingly precise strategy of survival.
It's the art of what you've called the civilizational fortress.
Exactly. It's this idea that you can only maintain a high-trust, peaceful society at home if you're willing to build a terrifyingly sharp wall around it.
It's a trade-off that most Western democracies, they're just too fractured to even consider.
And it reveals a Japan that is, I think, no longer interested in following the world's rules, but is deadly serious about surviving its collapse.
That opening narrative, it just sets the stage perfectly for this deep dive because it really does encapsulate the central tension of modern Japanese statecraft.
Right.
For you, the listener, the mission here is to understand that this move, it isn't schizophrenic governance. It's a really sophisticated, integrated philosophy.
So we're going to unpack it.
Yeah, we're unpacking how Japan's governing philosophy, and specifically its high-trust society and, its formidable bureaucratic efficiency, allows it to execute this massive, high-stakes trade-off.
They're spending huge political and fiscal capital to secure the internal peace.
In order to focus the necessary resources on external hardening, the fortress has to be stable on the inside to withstand the pressure of building that wall on the outside.
Okay, so let's unpack this, starting right at the foundation.
Yeah.
Securing the home front. Because that abolition of the provisional gasoline tax, that 1.5 trillion yen bet on stability, it's about so much more than fuel prices.
It's symbolic. It's about recalibrating the citizen-state relationship.
So we have to start with the mechanics of that infamous 51-year temporary tax.
It was a fascinating piece of fiscal history, really. The provisional gasoline tax had become this symbol of an entrenched, unresponsive bureaucracy, kind of a political albatross.
And what were the numbers?
So before December 31st, the total tax burden on a single liter of gasoline was 53.8 yen. And this was meticulously split.
Yeah.
You had the standard tax rate, which was 28.7 yen, and then the provisional part, the one from 1974, that was 25.1 yen. That 25.1 is the key number here.
And the way they executed the removal, it had this bizarre layer of irony that on the surface made the whole thing look almost meaningless to the consumer, at least for a minute.
That's the key confusion point we need to clear up. The government had actually been running this emergency subsidy program for months, to shield consumers from massive price spikes because of global volatility. And that subsidy was almost poetically set at 25.1 yen per liter.
The exact amount of the provisional tax.
The exact amount. So what happens on New Year's Day? The tax vanishes, but the subsidy expires at the exact same time. The net cost to the consumer at the pump. It remained almost identical.
Which prevented price shock and, people hoarding gasoline. So if the price didn't instantly plummet, what was the point? Why sacrifice 1.5 trillion yen in annual revenue? This is where the analysis has to shift away from simple economics, doesn't it?
It has to. You have to move into political psychology. The benefit wasn't primarily about immediate cash savings at the pump. It was the fundamental legal change to the tax structure. That 51-year-old weight was just lifted.
And that sends a potent signal.
A hugely potent signal. It says the state is not only capable of responding to public hardship, but it is willing to relinquish a significant long-term revenue source to do it. We frame this not merely as an anti-inflation measure, but as a fundamental recalibration of the social contract.
An act of benevolent governance.
Exactly.
The power of that symbolism is just immense, especially when you think about how central fuel is to the daily lives, to the commerce of the entire nation.
We came across this really illustrative story about a man named Kenji, an independent courier working out in the suburbs of Saitama, just outside Tokyo.
Okay.
For him, the provisional tax wasn't some abstract number on a government report. It was the disappearing margin of his small business. He watched global inflation eat away at his income, but that tax, it felt like the final fixed injustice.
So when it was legally gone.
Even if his pump price hadn't radically changed that day, the psychological relief was profound. He bought a slightly more expensive, a high-quality bento for his daughter, a small, tangible investment in domestic peace.
He felt seen.
He felt, just like Tanaka-san, the taxi driver, that the elite bureaucracy understood the mechanics of his survival.
That story really drives home the importance of stabilizing domestic logistics, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, Japan is defined by its supply chains, its extreme urbanization. If the cost of moving goods or getting workers to those massive industrial centers collapses, the whole system just fractures.
That's why, by strategically stabilizing fuel costs, the state is protecting what we call the logistical blood vessels of the nation.
The blood vessels. I like that.
They're making sure the entire distribution network, the commerce, the commutes, the ability of essential workers to function doesn't suffer a volatile collapse because of some external global storm.
And the estimated average household saving, was it 13,000 yen a year? It might seem small.
It does seem small, but in a deflationary high-trust environment, it's a crucial, tangible dividend that sustains confidence in the system.
And here's where the move transcends being just a simple economic stimulus and becomes really a work of political genius, correcting that long-standing regional imbalance.
We often forget that. Once you get outside of the major cities, public transit just vanishes, and the car becomes a mandatory lifeline.
Absolutely. The uniform national tax rate was profoundly regressive, especially in rural and regional Japan.
You think about the Kanto Koshin region, that's Tokyo and its super dense surroundings. They have the most advanced public transit networks on Earth. Gasoline consumption per capita is comparatively low because everyone is on a train.
But then you go out to the less developed regions.
And the dependence on motor vehicles for everything, school, work, shopping, basic services, it's absolute.
And the data on this, it shows the burden was distributed in a way that truly threatened domestic harmony.
Oh, the data is absolutely staggering. Households in Okinawa, which, generally have the lowest average annual per capita incomes in the nation, they were bearing 2.8 times the gasoline cost burden compared to households in the highly urbanized Tokyo area.
2.8 times.
And Okinawa isn't an outlier. If you look at regions like Tohoku, far to the north, or Hokuriku and Shikoku, they're characterized by older populations, long mandatory commutes. They were shouldering almost double the tax burden you'd see in the major urban centers.
So the abolition of the provisional tax, it acts like a targeted subsidy to the areas that need it most. It effectively narrows that cost of living gap that's been fueling regional resentment for decades.
Precisely. A household in the Tokyo region might only see a reduction of about 4,000 yen per capita annually. But in those critically important regions like Tohoku, Hokuriku, and Shikoku, they stand to gain an annual reduction closer to 8,000 yen per capita.
So it's double the impact.
It's double the impact, hitting the demographic and geographic areas that require stability the most. This is a highly calculated political investment. It stabilizes regional household finances, it reduces logistics costs for local businesses, and it revitalizes regional economies by just giving them some breathing room.
An elegant solution to a 50-year problem, solved in a single bureaucratic stroke.
And it reinforces the domestic foundation of that civilizational fortress.
That is compelling. So we've established this firm, stable internal foundation secured by a 1.5 trillion yen investment in domestic peace. But now we hit the central paradox, the core contradiction. They have sacrificed this immense annual revenue stream, Yet they simultaneously initiated the largest defense spending increase since the 1940s. How do they perform this fiscal miracle, especially given Japan's notoriously terrible fiscal health?
This is the absolute crux of the matter. Japan is drowning in debt. We are talking about general government gross debt as a percentage of GDP consistently hovering around 250%.
Which is the worst among advanced economies.
By far. So to abandon 1.5 trillion yen in annual revenue and commit to a massive multi-year defense buildup in this environment, it seems completely untenable if you apply, Western economic or political logic.
So how does the administrative Leviathan manage this? They have to plug a gigantic hole while simultaneously writing the biggest checks in decades?
They rely on something we often fail to recognize in the West. This deep institutional Confucian bureaucratic efficiency. This paradox isn't managed through the chaotic ideological battles we see in, say, U.S. government shutdowns.
Right.
It's managed by a highly meritocratic elite within ministries who specialize in reallocating, reforming, and optimizing existing systems with surgical precision. The state capacity is simply immense. The bureaucracy finds the money because failing to execute the strategic plan is just not an option.
Okay, let's scrutinize the FY 2025 budget. What does it reveal about their specific priorities in managing this colossal balancing act?
The budget is a masterpiece of precision expenditure management. First, they showed a commitment to long-term fiscal consolidation. The issuance of government bonds for FY 2025 is down to 28.6 trillion yen.
And that's significant because
It's the first time in 17 years that the amount has been less than 30 trillion yen in the initial budget. They are showing global bond markets and the domestic public that they are still serious about debt stabilization, even while spending aggressively.
But the expenditures on their two pillars, Social Security and defense, are staggering. Let's start with the social pillar, that domestic safety net that reinforces the high-trust society.
The social pillar totals roughly 38.3 trillion yen. That's an increase of over 558 billion from the previous year. And this isn't just maintenance spending, it's targeted reinforcement of human infrastructure.
So specific investments.
You look at the Children's Future Strategy, they're pushing toward full implementation, realizing over 80% of its initial goals. This includes measures like drastically enhancing childcare leave benefits, increasing them temporarily to 100% of salary.
Which is a huge psychological and economic relief for young families.
Huge. And at the same time, they're raising wages for critical frontline workers like childcare staff by a significant 10.7%.
That's a direct investment in reversing the demographic crisis and just maintaining the social fabric. But they're also addressing the chronic low morale issue among teachers, which affects everything.
Yes. They recognize that the teaching profession is the core of future societal maintenance. So they're implementing this crucial phased increase in additional adjustments for teachers, aiming to raise the percentage from 4% now to 10% by 2030.
And that's paired with reforms.
Paired with mandated work-style reforms designed to drastically reduce the administrative workload that teachers have to bear. It shows a long-term structural approach to stabilizing the domestic environment by investing in the people who manage the next generation.
And what about regional investment? Does the budget compensate for the lost gasoline tax revenue by giving more direct funds back to local governments?
They absolutely are. They doubled the local revitalization grants in the initial budget, going from 100 billion to 200 billion yen.
And this money is for?
Right.
What specifically?
It's explicitly designed to support local autonomy and ingenuity. We are talking about funding projects like developing drone delivery models in remote areas, strengthening local crime prevention with security camera networks.
To combat the rise of that Yami Beto underground criminal labor.
Exactly, and creating tourist infrastructure to support the regional economy. The central government is decentralizing financial power to reinforce regional stability.
Okay, now we turn to the second pillar, the defense buildup. Non-social security expenditure is up, and we know why.
It's driven primarily by the defense buildup program. It reaches 8.47 trillion yen in the FY 2025 budget. That's an increase of nearly 750 billion from the previous year.
And the core insight here for the listener is what?
That This budget is the ultimate expression of the civilizational fortress. You have the commitment to stabilizing the next generation and supporting the regions. That's the 38.3 trillion yen social pillar sitting right side by side with the commitment to external hardening, the 8.47 trillion defense pillar.
But wait a minute, we keep saying this is a fiscal miracle, but they still abandon 1.5 trillion yen in highly stable annual gasoline tax revenue. How are the elite bureaucrats actually managing that specific gap? Are they just kicking the can down the road?
And that is a crucial point of skepticism. It reveals the political maneuvering that's inherent even in this high-trust system. The administration has explicitly avoided giving a clear, long-term explanation for replacing the lost revenue.
So what's the temporary fix?
They've bridged the immediate shortfall by using existing special corporate tax measures as a temporary measure. They've postponed the definitive decision on stable, long-term funding, promising to find a solution within a year. You are right. It is a political maneuver that momentarily sacrifices long-term transparency for immediate public relief.
So isn't that just passing the political buck? Doesn't that go against the whole supposed meritocratic long-term planning we're attributing to them?
It creates a gap, absolutely. A gap between the ideal of bureaucratic planning and the reality of political necessity. However, the crucial difference from Western democracies is that public trust is placed less on the promise of the politician and more on the competence of the meritocrat.
Yeah.
The public implicitly believes that even if the government avoids explaining how they'll solve the funding problem, the administrative apparatus is competent enough to eventually figure it out without collapsing the system. The postponement is accepted because the immediate relief, the tax cut, was delivered so effectively.
And that belief is what keeps the whole system running. It's the story of the fiscal miracle.
Yes, the anecdote of the young father, Sato, in Tokyo is perfect here. He filmed a short clip documenting his day, which went viral. He was dropping his son off at this brand new government-subsidized daycare center, a tangible symbol of welfare expansion.
Right.
And moments later, he was scrolling through news on his phone about the record billions being spent on hypersonic defense technology.
And his reaction.
His expression was a mix of confusion and just profound awe. He called it a fiscal miracle, wondering how the same government could possibly afford both. But he concluded that the safety of his family was somehow guaranteed by the invisible presence of the meritocrats, the unseen administrative elite obsessively balancing those immense books in the background.
The ultimate trade-off. We will protect your social safety and expand your children's welfare, but only because we are competent enough to simultaneously build the walls high enough to keep external chaos from reaching you.
The state capacity legitimizes the huge simultaneous expenditures.
The execution is the legitimation.
Exactly. When they successfully manage Social Security expenditures, adhering to real growth limits set by population aging, while simultaneously funding this historically massive defense buildup, that chilling continuity, that precision, it assures the populace that they are in good hands. The bureaucracy is prioritizing long-term strategic survival, and the public is, sometimes grudgingly allowing it.
That sets us up perfectly to analyze the second half of this strategy, the external hardening. We've established the stable, high-trust domestic foundation. Now, let's look in detail at the terrifyingly sharp wall they're building around it.
The transition encapsulated in the 2026 National Security Strategy is, I think, arguably the most consequential shift in Japanese security doctrine since the post-war era.
And we have to understand it not as a political whim.
Not at all. It's a methodical, realism-based evolution. They are strategically removing the post-war legal and doctrinal shackles, shifting away from a passive, exclusively defense-oriented policy to what we term realism-based civilizational armor.
The public acquiescence to this is what really stands out to me, especially when you remember the massive, vocal protests against the security legislation back in 2015. Why the sudden profound silence now regarding a potentially record-breaking military budget?
Because the external security environment has changed from an abstract threat to a palpable reality. For the average citizen, the images of North Korean missiles flying over the islands, combined with the continuous military growth and assertiveness of China, have made preparation a necessity. It's no longer a political choice.
And the polling reflects this.
It does. A vast majority of the public now accepts that Japan must exercise some form of collective self-defense if, for instance, a Taiwan contingency directly threatens the country's security and supply lines. What was considered reckless pacifist betrayal 10 years ago is now just viewed as somber realism.
So the strategy is less about abandoning peace and more about insulating Japan, the protected fortress, from the global chaos that is swirling outside the gate.
The goal is deterrence. As one high-ranking official put it, the spending represents the minimum necessary in the most severe security environment of the post-war era. The entire focus is on capability and readiness. It's about having the undeniable ability to respond decisively and protect the internal order if a conflict approaches their shores.
And this societal acceptance is the political fuel for that 9 trillion yen commitment.
It is, so let's detail that commitment because the scale of the counterstrike arsenal they are building is enormous. It's rapidly shifting Japan into a top-tier global military spender.
What are the headline numbers?
The FY 2026 defense spending is hitting a record $58 billion, or 9.04 trillion yen. This is the 12th consecutive annual increase. And if the current 5-year buildup continues on this trajectory, Japan will potentially become the world's 3rd largest military spender.
And the investment is focused.
Critically, it is overwhelmingly focused on standoff and strike capabilities, the sharp wall itself.
Okay, let's unpack the core component, the missiles. We need to understand the difference between what they're building at home and what they're buying from abroad.
We're seeing an acceleration in domestic production first. The upgraded Type 12 surface-to-ship missile is a primary focus. Its projected range is about 1,000 kilometers.
What means it can reach?
It can reach critical military and infrastructure targets in China's mainland and North Korea. And the fascinating part is that it is being deployed ahead of its original schedule, with the first batteries strategically placed on Kyushu, the closest main island to any potential theater of conflict.
So that domestic system gives them speed and supply chain independence.
But the Tomahawk cruise missiles, they provide the depth of strike needed for true deterrence.
Absolutely. Japan is acquiring up to 400 U.S.-made Tomahawk cruise missiles, which have a massive 1,600-kilometer range.
And the strategy isn't just buying the missiles, it's about integrating them. The plan is to equip 10 Aegis destroyers with Tomahawk launch functionality. For FY 2025 and FY 2026, they're completing the modification of 5 destroyers and adding launch functionality to others, specifically citing the Miyoko and the Atago in the 2026 plans.
And there's an underwater component, too.
A critical one. They are mass-producing a new, long-range submarine-launched missile that can be fired from the torpedo tubes of their latest Taige-class submarines. This gives them a vital second-strike underwater deterrence capability.
That is a comprehensive arsenal that just fundamentally redefines the scope of their defense. I mean, it's a massive philosophical leap for a population that was raised on a pacifist constitution.
And this brings us back to that psychological acceptance. The reframing of these capabilities is essential.
I recall the story of the elderly woman, Hana, living in a coastal town in Kyushu.
Yes. She had lived her entire life under the shadow of World War II and the strictures of post-war pacifism. And when the new defensive arrays, the missile batteries, were installed near the horizon, she told a local journalist that she viewed them not as weapons of fear, but as armor.
Armor.
She said the sea used to feel like an open, vulnerable door, but now it feels like a wall that protects my grandchildren. She has internalized the doctrine that counterstrike capability is not a sword for conquest, but the absolute thickest layer of a shield designed to ensure conflict never reaches the fragile, high-trust world within.
And that transition from a taboo weapon to a necessary protective wall is the great political achievement that allows this budget to pass without crippling opposition.
It demonstrates that when a culture perceives its survival is truly at stake, profound political and constitutional shifts can occur with startling speed, especially when they're backed by bureaucratic competence. And this high-tech commitment extends deep into advanced naval and unmanned systems.
Let's talk about the naval component, because controlling the water around the fortress is paramount. What does SHIELD entail?
Japan is establishing a national multi-layered coastal defense system called SHIELD that stands for Synchronized, Hybrid, Integrated, and Enhanced Littoral Defense.
And they're putting serious money behind it.
A significant chunk of change, $640.6 million. This system relies heavily on integrating USVs, unmanned surface vessels, and UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, for intelligence gathering and surveillance. They're acquiring small, ship-based UAVs for their surface vessels and mass acquiring foreign systems like Shield AI's V-Beat.
Which will be integrated onto their new ships.
Exactly, onto their new Sakura-class offshore patrol vessels. The future of coastal surveillance is increasingly unmanned and networked.
And the traditional naval assets are also being rapidly upgraded, which reflects the urgency of controlling that immediate littoral environment.
Yeah, they're funding the construction of key assets, including the 10th Taige-class submarine, their advanced diesel-electric boat, and one of the upgraded Mogami-class frigates, which is now designated the new FFM.
And what's noteworthy there is the prioritization of shipbuilding slots.
It is. They secured funding for only one new FFM in FY 2025, partly because they're prioritizing near-term shipyard slots to support strategic foreign partners like Australia, who selected the upgraded Mogami class for their future fleet. It shows that even during a massive domestic buildup, alliance management remains a bureaucratic priority.
And finally, there's the massive strategic defense program that replaces the failed land-based Aegis system.
The cancellation of Aegis Ashore back in 2020 due to safety concerns was a huge setback. The budget now includes critical preparation for tests of two colossal 12,000-ton Aegis system-equipped vessels, or ASEVs.
These things are going to be enormous.
Enormous. Around 190 meters long. And they'll serve as mobile, sea-based ballistic missile defense platforms. This ensures the defense shield remains robust without the public safety concerns of land-based batteries.
And the Izumo-class carriers.
They are also continuing the extensive multi-year modification of the two Izumo-class helicopter carriers, Izumo and Kaga. They're committing over $182 million for continued conversion work that allows them to operate the F-35B short takeoff and vertical landing fighter aircraft. This $687 million overall modification program is a definitive commitment to projecting and protecting power across the maritime domain.
It's clear that the external fortification is comprehensive, technologically advanced, and historically expensive. But it brings us back to the central question that enables this entire strategy. How is this kind of high-stakes, two-front policy executed without collapsing the system from the inside? It demands a type of stability and collective commitment that we simply don't see in other developed nations. It must come down to the very governance model itself.
And it does. The civilizational fortress is structurally sound because the entire society operates on a unique high-trust infrastructure. We call it the Galapagos Fortress model because, much like the islands, it has specialized culturally for internal perfection, prioritizing consensus and predictability above all else. This cultural bedrock is the ultimate foundation that makes the fiscal paradox viable.
When we talk about high trust, we're talking about something more profound than just low crime statistics. It's the invisible cultural capital that allows those statistics to even exist in the first place.
It stems from deep cultural homogeneity. Because the vast majority of the population shares the same foundational history, schooling, and ethnic background, they share a deeply internalized default moral operating system. This high social capital simplifies social interaction dramatically. It allows for a default assumption of predictability and shared standards.
The collective is always prioritized over the individual.
Always.
We had that perfect anecdote about Liam, the expat designer, and his forgotten laptop.
Yes, the MacBook Pro anecdote is classic. Liam forgot his brand new, expensive MacBook Pro on a public bench in a bustling area.
And when he rushed back?
2 hours later, when he rushed back, it wasn't just sitting there. A complete stranger who had noticed a sudden rain shower had placed it inside a plastic shopping bag to protect it.
The stranger didn't benefit at all.
Not at all. But they viewed that expensive private property as part of the shared public space that required maintenance. It was a civic act of preserving the abstract standard of order.
But the irony, the dark side of that high trust club, is that the same homogeneity that protected his property also built an invisible wall against him.
Precisely. Liam realized the system's safety was a perk of a club he could observe but never fully join. Despite being a perfect, financially secure tenant, his landlord refused to renew his lease, explicitly preferring a Japanese tenant.
The landlord prioritized predictability.
He prioritized the absolute predictability and cultural compatibility, the maintenance of the internal logic over the financial certainty of a good expat renter. That invisible barrier is necessary to preserve the system's unique operating parameters.
And the engine driving all of this internalized control is the concept of meiwaku. We need to go beyond the simple definition of causing trouble and explain its profound psychological power.
Meiwaku is the single most important psychological governor in the society. It translates to causing trouble or inconveniencing others, but its function is far broader. It's an internalized moral imperative that ensures collective harmony while it takes precedence over almost any expression of individual liberty that could introduce friction.
It demands constant, exhausting psychological labor from every citizen to maintain a smooth social equilibrium.
And that psychological labor is the true wall protecting the system from chaos. The anecdote of Kenji, the stressed salaryman, and the drop coin at 1 a.m. demonstrates its depth.
Set the scene.
Kenji is walking home, utterly exhausted, and accidentally drops a single 100 yen coin. The street is empty. Logically, given the low value and the lack of witnesses, he should just leave it.
But he doesn't.
He spends 5 full minutes on his hands and knees in the dark, painstakingly searching for that one coin.
Why does he do it?
Because leaving it is an act of disrupting order. It's a tiny crack in the perfect facade of the streetscape. To leave it is to risk causing meiwaku, not just to a future pedestrian who might trip, but to the abstract standard of societal perfection itself. He cannot be the one who introduces an imperfection or breaks that immaculate standard.
Public order is not a passive state. It is a continuous, collective psychological effort.
Maintained by the self-controlled refusal to be the nail that sticks out. And this leads directly to what we perceive as repressive rules in public life, which are simply the enforced consequences of this governor.
The silence on the train.
Think about the silence. The rarity of eating or drinking on commuter trains, the potential smell, the crumbs. That is extreme meiwaku. The rigidly controlled volume of conversation, the cooperative body language required to move through crowds, the extreme care in managing one's baggage so it doesn't inconveniently touch another person.
The society accepts high self-control as the prerequisite for high social capital.
Even wearing a mask when slightly sick is framed as an unavoidable act of civic duty, not for yourself, but to prevent spreading germs to the collective.
This sounds wonderful for public civility, but that psychological pressure must have a severe cost when it's translated into the workplace.
That is precisely where the cost of meiwaku is paid in burnout and chronic overwork. The fear of causing trouble for the team having to pick up the slack, the team having to reorganize the schedule, that is the primary engine of long work hours.
So employees stay late, long after their tasks are objectively done.
Simply to avoid the social disgrace of appearing to burden their coworkers. It's a mandated solidarity that discourages taking time off and encourages relentless, self-policed effort.
And this structural incentive feeds into the slowness of consensus building, the infamous nemawashi, or root binding.
Nemawashi is the required practice of informally building consensus across every single stakeholder before a formal decision is ever presented. The manager has to go to every person individually, often over several weeks, to address all potential concerns and secure preliminary agreement.
So when the formal meeting finally happens,
the consensus is instantaneous because all the conflict has been resolved privately. This guarantees complete buy-in and stability, but the cost in time and agility, especially when you compare it to Western corporate speed, is immense. It contributes to the perception that Japanese companies are slow to make big, disruptive, strategic decisions.
And this cultural tendency towards isolated internal excellence and perfection leads directly to the competitive advantages and the vulnerabilities of the Galapagos Fortress.
The culture of monozukuri, or craftsmanship, is the embodiment of this. It drives manufacturing excellence by prioritizing quality, precision, and longevity through long-term R&D. This commitment to principle is why Japan retains profound competitive advantages in specialized niche fields, like specialty materials or advanced components.
Things the world relies on but never sees.
Exactly. But that cultural commitment to absolute perfection, if taken too far, flips into anti-pragmatism, turning a virtue into a systemic vulnerability.
We've seen this tragically illustrated in recent high-profile quality testing scandals at major manufacturers.
We have, and the deep analysis suggested the issue wasn't usually about covering up dangerous known flaws. Instead, the pressure for absolute perfection, often setting internal standards far beyond any required international legal threshold, just became impossible to meet.
The pressure to uphold the perfect internal standard was so immense
that staff resorted to falsifying inspection results. The moral requirement to be perfect trumped the business reality that the product was already globally acceptable.
The cost-benefit analysis breaks down entirely when principle is prioritized over practicality. The story of staff spending hours looking for a single cent error in accounting illustrates this perfectly.
Absolutely. The labor cost involved in finding that 1 cent error far outweighs the value of the coin, but the principle of precision and non-imperfection must win out. The same logic applies to medical pragmatism.
Like the epidural rate.
Look at the historically low epidural rate in childbirth compared to Western nations, or the cultural hesitancy to rapidly approve new, effective weight loss drugs. The cultural expectation often values endurance and rigor. The hardship itself is valued as part of the process of becoming or curing. Ease is viewed with suspicion.
So we have this deep cultural foundation built on perfection, high trust, and collective responsibility. The speed is slow at the beginning, thanks to Nimawashi, but once consensus is achieved, what happens?
The momentum of systemic change becomes unstoppable. Once the collective decides to move, the speed is unmatched because the inertia of internal disagreement is zero.
And we are seeing this weaponized now in corporate governance reforms.
We are. The Tokyo Stock Exchange started shaming companies that have persistently low price-to-book ratios. This public shaming created powerful peer pressure, the collective fear of causing meiwaku among peers, that is causing rapid nationwide corporate reform to accelerate.
What would be a slow, fragmented process in any Western democracy.
Is becoming a comprehensive national trend in Japan because of that leveraged collective pressure.
It's phenomenal. The same invisible mechanism that enforces silence on the train is now driving fundamental corporate reform and financing a massive defense buildup. The central administrative elite can leverage this unique social governor for overwhelming strategic goals.
What we have analyzed today is the meticulous, high-stakes, dual strategy of the Civilizational Fortress, and it's built entirely on the principle of meritocratic stability. Through precise bureaucratic calibration and deep cultural trust, the state has proven it can afford both massive social safety nets, the 1.5 trillion yen tax cut, the welfare expansion, and simultaneous military expansion, that monumental 9 trillion yen defense commitment.
The elite meritocracy delivered tangible economic relief to cement the high-trust domestic foundation while simultaneously installing a sophisticated civilizational isolation wall of advanced weaponry.
They outsourced certain elements of their hard sovereignty to the U.S. in the past, allowing them to focus 100% of their immense administrative energy on internal perfection. Now they're bringing that hard sovereignty back under their own control, but only after ensuring the internal system is fully reinforced.
Japan has made a stark collective choice. It has sacrificed chaotic individual freedom for collective predictability.
And it has successfully convinced the public that the price of peace in the form of massive defense spending is not a betrayal of their past, but a necessary, somber investment in preserving their unique social order.
It is an alternative model of modernity. It's a demonstration that a high-tech nation facing immense demographic and fiscal challenges can undertake a total fortification of its future, ensuring they remain a final protected bastion of their distinct civilization well into the latter half of the 21st century.